22.
Now, Christine, I understand that you're not a veteran, but you're a civilian who certainly supported our military personnel in not one war, but many wars. So we're going to talk about your involvement with our military personnel from the very beginning. And I understand that you first became involved with the military in 1941. Do you want to tell me where you were living at the time and how you got involved?
The street address?
Just the town is good enough.
New Britain, Connecticut.
Oh, so you're a longtime resident of New Britain.
Yes, I was born here.
And how did you get involved?
I graduated from New Britain High School in June of 41 after Pearl Harbor, which was December 7, 41. Our local veterans of foreign wars and Mayor Quigley of our city got together and opened up an armed forces canteen.
And what did you have to do with the canteen?
We entertained the troops. We were on what was our railroad arcade, and we had, at that time, we had a railroad station and trains going by. So when the troops got off went through New Britain and they saw the sign, they were welcome to come in and be at the canteen. And also there was a sign that there were cots upstairs where they could sleep.
And what were your exact duties at the canteen, and how often did you go there?
We made meals, we prepared food, we played games with them, did anything to keep them busy.
And how often did you do that?
Once or twice a week.
Were you also working in a regular job at that time?
Yes, I was.
How long did you continue to work at the canteen?
Until the war was over and it closed.
Wow. Can you remember any experiences or any particular events that happened while you were working at the canteen?
Well, one of the most things that I remember is Mother used to say, "I wish you would bring the boys home for Sunday dinner."
And did you?
Yes, I did.
How often would you do that?
Well, anytime they were around on Sunday.
So you would bring one soldier home at a time, or a group?
Yeah.
When the soldiers would get off the train and come to the canteen, how long would they stay? Was it typical that they'd stay for just one day?
Some of them just came in, and then they came in from the base in New London, the submarine base, because they were stationed here.
And would they just stay the day, or would they stay over for several days? Or a
Some,
week?
if they were staying in town, they would stay at the cots upstairs.
Now, at that point, were you writing to any of our GIs?
Yes, I was writing to them. The reason why was because I worked for the only Italian lawyer in New Britain. There was only one. And his people were people who came to New Britain at the turn of the 19th century, and they didn't know how to write, so they asked me to write to their sons.
So the beginning of your letter writing career, which we'll hear more about, started in World War II when you were writing to these Italian boys?
Yeah,
But you were writing to them in English?
for their mother.
How many soldiers did you write to?
That is hard to remember.
Can you give me an estimate? Is it more like 5 or more like 50?
I would say more like 5.
And did these young men write back to you?
No,
They would write to their parents? Did
Yeah.
you have to translate then?
no. I guess they had that done by the attorney. I don't know.
Oh.
I just wrote the letters. And then there were times when they wanted to do something for me for helping them, and I would get a dozen of eggs or something from their apple tree.
Wow. Do you recall any specific soldiers that you met at the canteen? Now, I happen to know that you ended up marrying a
Yeah.
very special soldier. Can you tell me how that happened?
Yeah, he came into town to go to the home of one of his best friends at Camp Davis. He was stationed at Camp Davis, and nobody was home. But when he got off the train, he remembered seeing the sign that there were cots on the second floor, so he came into the canteen.
And what was his name?
Joseph Thomas Gagnon.
So, all right. So, were you the hostess that greeted him in the canteen?
Yes.
And then what happened?
Well, we served them whatever we had. At the time we had rationing. Because of rationing, my mother would give us her ration coupons, so to help out at the canteen. So we would make sure they always had something to eat, even meals. We would try to prepare meals also.
And how long did he stay at the canteen?
Well, he had to get back to the base. It was just for the day. He stayed overnight, but the next day he had to be on the way. And they were hitchhiking. They didn't have cars.
Well, how did the relationship continue?
Well, he kept coming back.
I guess you served a good meal.
Yeah, whether his friends were home or not. Yeah. And he was an orphan.
So how long did you see him before you decided to get married?
Well, it was quite a while. I brought him home for dinner. My mother got very attached to him. So when the war ended, she knew he was living in, because he was alone at 16 in Boston, which he left from Boston as soon as Pearl Harbor broke out. Some men were put together and they went to New Caledonia, and they didn't have the name of the army, so when they got to New Caledonia they had a contest and they called it AmeriCal. Today I understand it has a number.
Oh, wow. Now, when he was serving overseas, was that before you met him or after?
After.
So you met him in the canteen and then he got stationed overseas in New Caledonia?
No. This is when he was stationed in Massachusetts at Fort Devens.
Had he returned from New Caledonia?
Yeah,
So you didn't know him until after he came back to the United States?
that's correct.
From when you met him, did he stay in the United States for the rest of the war?
Yes, because he was single, he didn't get out as soon as people who were married and had children. They got first choice.
And then did you get married at the end of the war?
Well, you see, he was, when he, let's see, I have to remember. When he went into the service, he was living in a hospital because because he was 16, and he had a foster mother, and she was out in Montana, but he wasn't close to her anyhow, so he lived at Tewksbury Hospital in Tewksbury, Mass. So he left from there. When he was drafted, he left from there, Tewksbury.
Mm-hmm. And were you married before or after he was discharged from the service?
Well, my mother found out that he was going to go back to Tewksbury to live. He wasn't sure what to do when he got back, so she invited him to come and live with us. She really, really loved him.
And when did you get married?
Oh, I think about 6 months later.
What year was that?
Let's see.
Well, it was at the end of the war, so it was probably 1946.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, it was 46.
yeah. You had told me before.
No, it was 45.
45?
My son was born 46.
That how you were selected to be a hostess. Can you tell me about that? Now, is this a hostess at the canteen?
Yes.
Okay, how were you selected?
I suppose because I was a legal secretary. And they probably thought they would like somebody who could write.
Now, did you tell me that there was a competition and that several of you had to write letters?
Yes.
How did that work?
We had to write letters and send 2 recommendations. So I selected the lawyer I worked for and also my doctor.
And the sample letters that you wrote, who did you submit these recommendations and these letters to? Who was the one who decided?
A woman by the name of Catherine Hoffman.
And was she the person who was the head of the canteen?
She was one of the persons, an officer at the Veterans of Foreign Wars.
Oh.
It was a group, also some men.
So this group from the Veterans of Foreign Wars selected who would work at the canteen?
That's correct.
And based on what you submitted, how many of you were accepted?
That I don't remember.
Did you tell me that?
Oh, among my group?
Yes.
Among my group, I was the only one.
Wow, so that was quite an honor.
Well, I still think it's because of the job I had.
And you were very qualified.
Because after the war started, a lot of the students were working in the factories because we were the hardware city of the world. And the jobs turned to defense industry. And because of that, everybody had a job. And even the men and women that went into the service later worked in the factories before they decided to go into the service or were drafted.
Right, so at the end of World War II, you married your soldier husband and continued to live in New Britain. However, that was not the end of your experience with our soldiers and our veterans. How did you stay involved with
In
the military?
1945, I joined the Veterans of Foreign Wars post for 5/11 in New Britain.
And what did you do with that post?
Well, the day that I joined, the World War women marched me up to the front of the room, and they said, "We're getting tired now. You are our secretary."
And how long did you remain the secretary of the VF?
The first 3 years.
And what else did you do as a member of that post?
All of the fundraising. We did fundraising, and we had programs in Americanism, legislative. The main thing was to do things to help the military, the servicemen and women, and also the veterans.
Can you remember any specific things that you did?
Yes. One of the things I felt bad about the women that were married to our veterans from overseas, because our people were against it. Our girls thought, well, why not us, you know? And I felt sorry for them. So I got in touch with the immigration department and asked them if I could start a program making them citizens, which they did. They gave me authority to fill out the immigration papers.
Do you know how many?
I wouldn't remember that.
What did you do to make these immigrants citizens? Did you have classes in citizenship?
I just filled out their applications.
And you submitted it to the immigration?
Yeah,
And they became citizens?
yeah.
Do you remember any specific?
Well, these would be people that they had to live here for 5 years.
Were these people the wives of from overseas that our soldiers had married overseas?
Right.
And they brought the women home, the
Yeah.
war brides?
Mhm.
They're the war brides. So that was the beginning of your involvement. As the years progressed, how did you stay involved with the military?
Well, I stayed in the VFW
Are you still a member today?
65 years. I joined in 45, December of 45.
Are you the oldest member of that post?
Yes. The word is continuous. You have to be a continuous.
So you've been a continuous member for 65 years?
Yes.
After World War II, along came the Korean War. How were you involved with the veterans?
I wasn't, because my husband developed a brain tumor, and I had to work. There was no income, and it was very difficult because he had it for 2 years.
So during the Korean War, you were busy with family responsibilities between taking care of your son and taking care of your husband.
And I had a little boy, 8 years old.
I know that you became involved with the Vietnam War. Can you tell me what you did during that period?
I wrote letters to the men and women. Every time I read in the newspaper about somebody who was in Vietnam, I compiled a list, and I called the parents and told them I was a member of the VFW and would like to write to their sons. I had to be careful because at the time people were doing bad things with the families. So I had to be careful to let them know I was a person in authority belonging to an organization where we did things like that.
Did other members of your VFW post write letters to the Vietnam?
No.
What prompted you to take on that responsibility?
The first one that was wounded was Lieutenant Creel from the town of Harwinton, Harwinton, Harwinton. And he was the first one wounded from the state. And his address was in the paper. I believe. I think that's the way it was. I don't think I called. I think I found it in the newspaper, so I wrote to him. And when the letter came back, it just struck me as being something very important to do, because he said that the boys were not getting letters from home. So he took my letter and passed it along the front lines. And
Now,
that touched me.
he wrote back to you,
Yes.
so he did receive your letter. Was he at home when he received it, or over?
No, he was wounded. He was overseas.
And so you wrote to him over in Vietnam, and
Yeah.
he passed your letter along to others, and what a very nice thing.
Well, my collection that I later donated to CCSU, the letter, a copy of the letter is in there, because at the time a friend of mine wanted to submit some of my letters to the VFW department as a project, but they only accepted it as a personal project, not a group project.
So did you submit your letters to the VFW?
No,
Did you save copies of your letters?
I saved copies, yes, of all.
And how many letters did you finally end up writing throughout the Vietnam War?
That would be hard to say. Very hard to say, because there were so many, and if someone was not getting any mail and he was next to a person that I was writing to, that other person would write to me. And in some instances, I received letters asking me to do things.
Such as?
Whatever they asked me to do, I would do.
What kinds of things would they ask you to do?
One of the most important things that I was asked to do, a young man by the name of Donald Pelletier from New Britain, was at the perimeter, a Marine at the perimeter, guarding the perimeter at Da Nang, D-A-N-A-N-G, was wounded. And when he wrote to me from the Navy hospital, he asked me to go visit his mother at the hospital, New Britain Hospital, for the simple reason that he wanted me to write back and tell him how she was. He was a young man that kept writing to me. After the first letter, he kept in touch with me. And the mother, anybody that I wrote to would tell their parents about me. So when I went to the hospital to visit her, she made me promise something that shocked me. It shocked me very much, because she said, I want you to promise me that you won't tell him, but I'm going to die. And I want you to be his second mother.
Wow. What was your reaction?
Shocked that somebody would want me to be her son's mother. That I've kept in touch with him. He moved out of town, but he still comes back to New Britain. But when he first came home, he became the leader in one of our Memorial Day parades. The head of the official person.
Did you keep his mother's secret and not tell him?
No, I did not tell him. And he never found out about it until a year ago. Now we're into '09. A year ago, I decided maybe he should know. because this book was written by Professor Warschauer. It's called Connecticut History. I don't know if you know about it.
I do.
And a graduate student wrote read all the letters and wrote an essay in the Connecticut History book, which is given to library associations. It's not for sale.
It's a journal.
Yes.
Published by the Connecticut Association.
And by Professor Warschauer. And I understand it's in all the libraries in the country, a city, a town.
So back during the Vietnam War, you didn't tell Donald that his mother was
No.
dying. Did she die while he was overseas?
Yes. He was still in the hospital because he was pretty badly wounded. The Navy hospital.
And was he able to come home at that time?
Well, at the time, I decided that we had a big hall at the VFW, and I decided that we should invite the parents and set up a program where we would have the post office come in to teach them how to wrap packages and what to send overseas for them to eat. Because, you know, the fellows always complained about the food. I think in World War II they had things like Hershey bars. So I sent them little packages and whatever I could afford.
Now, Donald Pelletier, when was the first time you actually got to meet him face to face?
It was at this affair that I planned at the VFW. It was a Memorial Weekend. I can't remember everything about it, except it was on the front page of the local New Britain Herald. And over 500 came. Girlfriends, mothers, fathers.
Did you know that Donald Pelletier was going to be there?
Yes, because he wrote to tell me he was coming.
Oh.
So when he came to the door, he was on crutches, and I was so glad to meet him after writing for so long to him.
And I'm sure he was thrilled to meet you, too.
Yes, he was. And his family was there.
What a very nice experience.
Yes.
Now, we had talked about the number of letters. I know you can't remember exactly, but it was hundreds of letters that you wrote during the Vietnam era, correct?
Yeah, but it got to be too much for me. So after a while, we had World War I woman at the VFW who belonged to a factory in town called Norton Judd, North, N-O-R-T-H, Norton Judd, and she belonged to a little club there. So I asked her to help, so she came down to that affair where the families were invited and got addresses, and so I just couldn't do it all. But a lot of the letters, I only gave 200 to CCSU, but I went to the different towns because I got letters after a while from Plainville, Berlin, all nearby towns, and I thought they should help too, and I wanted them to write to the troops because not writing was a big thing during that war. Because so many people were against the war, they were even against me. They were calling me Mrs. Vietnam, but they didn't mean it in a nice way. The same treatment that the men got, I got.
Did that bother you? How did you handle that?
I just determined. Because if the fellows needed help, that was the thing to do.
Now, so you didn't just write to New Britain men. You wrote to soldiers from all across
Anybody
Canada.
that I found in the newspaper, and I called the families. They were from different towns, but most of them were New Britain.
And were you successful in getting some of the other towns around New Britain to write to the troops?
Yes, the VFW in the different towns I went to visit, and I would give them the letters.
So they could see what kinds of things to write about?
Right. Now I would give them the letters so they would start writing to the troops.
Was it typical for most of the soldiers to write back to you at that time, or no?
Yes, definitely. Not only them, but some officers. One day, a Navy officer wrote to me, and he asked me if I would collect clothing and toys and send it to the orphans in Saigon.
And did you?
Well, I went down to the American Legion and asked them if they would help me. I couldn't do it one person to take care of all that. So I went to I was also a member of the American Legion in New Britain, and he came to speak when he came home. The officer, when he came home to speak, he brought me some Vietnamese dolls, and I decided, instead of keeping them, to use it as a raffle gifts to raise more money for the clothing and the toys. But the members were wonderful, and I needed someone to pay for the postage.
So, with the help of the American Legion, you were able to raise money and collect toys to send over?
Yes, and later on the chaplain sent a letter back. I don't know if it was to me or the New Britain Herald, with a picture of the children. But the thing that occurred to me at the time, I never asked any questions, but I wondered, are they American?
The children.
I didn't know.
Did you ever find out?
No, I never asked.
Did you stay in touch with any of the soldiers that you wrote to? I know you continued to stay in touch with Donald Pelletier after the war. Did you stay in touch with any of the other soldiers?
Well, when they came home, we were invited to 3 weddings.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and the officer that wanted me to take care of the orphans,
You went to his wedding?
no, he was single, but his parents lived down the street from me, and he sent them some money to take me and my husband on a trip on one of the cruises, but I refused to go. I didn't want that kind of money spent on us, because I didn't write letters to get something back.
Do you recall the name of that officer?
Thomas Weir, W-E-I-R. I never saw him again, because when he got out of the service, well, he did another year. He decided to do another year. And when he came home, he moved. I don't know where he moved to. The parents died, so I never found out.
And so there were 3 weddings that you attended. Do you remember whose those were?
I can't remember the names now. And there was one fellow that came and invited us out to dinner. We accepted that.
So,
Oh,
that must have been very gratifying for you, for these soldiers to return home and for you to actually meet them face to face. What was that like?
that was, in fact, was the last Sunday in church, I finally met one.
You're kidding.
And this is 2009.
And last Sunday in
Yeah, I went to a church service, and we have our memorial services at the Greek church on Sunday. and Captain Miller, who was a submarine captain, was having the family was having his 40-day service, which we do. And his daughter, I knew that I was writing to her husband, so I mentioned it to her, and she said, we're now divorced after 35 years. She said, but he's going to come to the memorial service and I'll introduce you. So just last week was the first time I met him.
Oh my heavens, and did he remember your letters from Vietnam?
No, some of them did not. The ones that did not continue writing. Some continued writing for the whole year. Some I pulled through the whole year. But some just accepted the one letter, and thanked me for writing. But one day, a knock came to the door, and when I opened it, one of the fellows that I was writing to for the whole year came in with his Vietnam jacket. They had jackets with Vietnam on the back. And he took it off and handed it to me. And he said, I want you to have this. And I said, why? And he said, because I was stopping by a grill to have a couple of beers, and people started fighting with him because he was in the war, he said. So he didn't want that jacket. But many years later, he came knocking on my door many years later, and I gave it back to him with 2 dolls he sent me. Another one that sent me the Vietnamese dolls. And I told him, your wife and your family should have them. I'd like to give them back.
Do you remember his name?
I'd have to give some thought to some of these names because there's so many.
Was this a fellow who lived here in New Britain?
Yes, still does.
Do you still see him?
No. No, and also, the main thing that I neglected to tell you was that my husband died. I should have told you, but somehow we got off the subject. Joseph Gagnon died of a brain tumor in '56. And many years later, when the war started in '64, my boy graduated from high school and was drafted, and he didn't want to be drafted, so he took a test and joined the Air Force. And when he went into the Air Force, that was 10 years after his father died, he wanted me to marry a gentleman, a bachelor at the VA, who was helping him with his benefits, with his father's benefits, at the time. Well, still today, between Social Security and the VA, they take care of people with children up to, I think, 16 or 18. I think it was 18. And he was helping us with any problems we had at the VA. And so my son said, because I'm going off into the war and I'm going to volunteer for Vietnam, I would like you not to be alone. So he wanted me to marry that bachelor.
Did you feel the same way?
Well, he was a nice person because when he was helping him with his benefits, he was also taking him out, visiting and taking him out to the movies and things like that. So I thought he was nice. And after 10 years of being alone, I decided I should do that.
So did you get married?
Yes,
And how long were you married?
another 10 years.
Now, did you get married before your son left for overseas?
No, it was a long time after.
Oh. So tell me about your son's involvement in Vietnam. So
He didn't get there because he was the last member of a family, not an only son, which he also was. I think at that time they more considered a person that was, if he was gone, there's no one to carry on the name. I believe that's what happened. It's hard for me to remember that, but I know that he volunteered and they wouldn't take him, but they did give him a special assignment.
Where was that?
Well, when he first left, for 1 year, he went to electronics school in Biloxi, Mississippi. So I didn't see him for 1 year, even though all the other people that went in came home after their first, the first time they were in. And he didn't come home for 1 year. And when he did, they sent him to Germany. But he was on TDY on a special mission, which she couldn't tell me about. It was kind of confidential with the, well, it was something he couldn't talk about in the Air Force. At the time, we were stationed up at the Arctic Circle, but it was not a known fact that we were stationed there up near the Russian border.
And was your son up there?
Yes, on TDY, that's temporary duty. They would have put a van, a little small van, I guess you don't call it a van, whatever it was some kind of a vehicle, on an airplane, a C-130, something like that, was in the plane. And if something happened, I was later told by another person in the Air Force that they had to, if they got into any trouble, they had a button that they could use because they didn't know what was going on with the Russians there.
Well, what do you mean they had a button they could use? What would it do?
I guess destroy everything.
Oh, so
It was some confidential thing. I don't know anything about it because he couldn't talk.
So you actually had a personal involvement in Vietnam too. Your son was in the service, although he didn't serve in country in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Did you write letters to your son in between writing to all those other
Yes,
soldiers?
every week. And I still do.
Every week?
No.
I understand that your son lives in Norway.
Yeah, he married a girl from Norway.
Now, where are all of the other letters that you received from the veterans? Did you save all of those letters?
Well, I ended up with 200 after giving them out, and my friend that put a program together for the department, DFW. So I ended up with 200.
And those are the 200 that you donated to CCSU?
Well, he called the local history room at our public library asking for letters from Vietnam, and they gave him my telephone number. So when Professor Warshaw came here, he came with Dr. Greenfield. The two of them came to visit me, asking if he could borrow them for his history class at CCSU. And I said, I gave some thought to it, thinking about my age and the fact that I'm alone. And I decided I should place them there. So I decided right then and there to donate them to the university.
So
200 of them.
the 200 that you donated, are those all from the Vietnam era?
Yeah, they were all from the battle, yeah.
And they were all of the letters from the soldiers to you? Or were they your letters to the soldiers?
No, it was their letters to me.
Do you have any copies of the letters that you sent to them?
No, they're all at the university.
And we will get copies of those and attach them to your record for the Veterans History Project.
Yeah, they're in the L.U. library at the university. And they made copies so people could go through them but not touch the originals. And Dr. Greenfield took my high school class history and also my history of the veterans of foreign wars.
Now, the Vietnam era was not the end of your involvement with veterans, from what I understand. How did you stay involved with the military after Vietnam?
I feel like I'm still involved.
How so?
Well, I kind of feel like the war had something to do with me losing my son.
By you, how had something to do with you losing?
If he wasn't in the war, and in that particular position, instead of being drafted, going into the Air Force. I hate talking about this.
Well, then don't.
No. Because it's sad, you know.
Yes. Now, do you still have involvement with our military men and women?
I started writing letters to Iraq and Afghanistan, but I find that they don't answer. They don't answer because they now have email. But the parents tell me they pay $63 for some, I don't know what it's for, on the battlefield there. I don't know what the arrangement is or how it's done, but the mothers have emails at home, and that's the way they're doing it now. But one day, not recently, I had a platoon, a reserve platoon. We donated, I decided to bring the program into the VFW to do things to help send packages to this whole platoon. And I forgot now what I was going to say about that.
So you sent packages through the VFW to a platoon? Where was the platoon from?
Afghanistan. No, Iraq.
They were in Iraq. Was it a platoon from from Connecticut?
No, it was Rhode Island.
And how did you get that information?
Well, because there was a member of our auxiliary that told me about a friend of hers whose son was there. And we'll write to anybody we can find. If we can't find someone directly, somebody that we heard from, because we had been sending packages to other groups, but never did we have a platoon, a whole platoon. And the mother lives right down the street from me here.
And what was the response when the platoon got your packages?
I got a letter from the first lieutenant, the young man that I wrote to. Gave it to the first lieutenant because he said, I don't know what to do with this. So the lieutenant sent me a letter, and the lieutenant said, well, the best thing to do is to send, well, he thanked me, you know, for the wanting to do it. And he suggested that they needed things from home. He said they had a little store where they could buy ordinary things, but they needed something from home. He said little things from home, and most of all, Dunkin' Donuts coffee. I figured he was the one that wanted the Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And there are some, because we at the VFW here do a lot to help out at our veterans home, where we now have 400 homeless veterans, and the VA, they come in and out of there too, and we do everything we can to help them. And there was a couple that we met at me and a friend of mine met at another group we belonged to. And this couple wanted very much, they didn't have anybody in the family, didn't know anybody who was overseas. So they asked us if they could give us things to send to the home here, the veterans home in Rocky Hill. So they went to their church members and talked about the coffee, and they came to knocking on my door one day with 24 pounds.
Of Dunkin' Donuts coffee?
Yeah. Well, in the first place, I wrote to Dunkin' Donuts, the company. I found out who the president was and everything, and I wrote, and I got a letter back telling me, because to do a whole platoon, I couldn't count on just the members, because we have to donate to so many things in connection with the servicemen and women and the homeless and the regular veterans and their families. It involves all those people. So I decided to write to big companies for whatever was needed, and Dunkin' Donuts told me to go to the internet, which I had to have someone else do. I don't have any modern equipment. And they sent the package directly. So they got an awful lot of Dunkin' Donuts coffee.
Wow! I bet they loved that.
Yeah. And then, of course, we started sending packages, and what went over real good with them was beef jerky, some kind of sausage they put on pizza. That little sausage, little square, or circles.
Pepperoni.
Pepperoni, yeah. I can never say that. Because I don't like it.
So you're still involved with vets today?
Oh, yeah.
Now, have you gotten any letters back from
Yes.
the Iraq or Afghanistan vets?
Yes.
So some of them do use the old-fashioned method of writing letters,
Yeah.
although most use email.
Well, I had 2 pilots who, I have to get it right now. 2 pilots, when we took over the Baghdad airport, they went to meet, the way the war was going, we were supposed to go into Baghdad from Turkey. But they didn't let the Americans do that. So they had to find some other way. So they did, one side of the Euphrates River came the Marines, and the other side was the 3rd Infantry Division to take over Baghdad. They started going down along the river. So when they got to Baghdad, there was nobody there, so, you probably know that there was nobody there, so there wasn't any real big thing going on. But those 2 pilots that I wrote to, I got their addresses from television. The Brad Davis show had their names, and I wrote to the 2 of them. And it was interesting because they didn't write until they came home. But when they came home, I was excited to think that they were the original pilots from the Baghdad airport. And then they started flying over to meet our regular troops in the town of Baghdad.
Are you writing any letters lately?
Not lately, because they're not answering. Besides, I'm kind of busy.
You're busy with your other efforts at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post.
Yes, yeah. We do a lot of Americanism programs.
Can you tell me about some of the programs that you do? at the VFW?
Well, personally, today I'm secretary. I was a past president, but it's trouble. They have trouble finding people to be secretaries, so I kind of get stuck.
So you're the secretary of the VFW post?
Yeah.
What activities are you involved in with the post?
Everything. Everything we do, except I don't go to the. They on Friday night they go to put on a bingo at the Rocky Hill home, and I don't go with them because I'm up at 4 or 5 in the morning, and I can't. I don't go out at night.
What are some of the things that you do? What programs do you put on? How are you involved in? I know you said you collect things for the.
Well, I'm the PR chairman, so I do the newspaper stories on what we do.
You write the stories
Yeah,
and you submit that to the local newspapers?
yeah.
What other things does your post do for the vets?
Well, we try to help the families. We try to help our own families. If we have some tragedies within the group, we try to do whatever we can and whatever we can afford to do. But I personally am kind of like the program chairman. I bring in projects, and my favorites are Americanism projects. And we give flags, and I belong to the POWMIA Connecticut chapter of Forget Me Not.
And what do you do with that organization?
I'm a member since '64. I'm an old member.
What activities does that chapter involve themselves with?
Well, I'm personally not involved in any of it. I'm just a member. But during the Vietnam War, I was still a member of the families of the missing in action and POWs. I've done so much, it's hard to remember every little thing. And the families of I was a supporter of them, and I was with them. And gee, there was another group. I was a long-distance volunteer of the wall when it was built.
Christine, you certainly have been involved with our military for many, many years now. What would you say was the motivating factor for you becoming involved way back when, in 1941?
I just thought there was a need. I learned that from my mother, because when my mother was good-hearted. She was disciplined, and she disciplined. I'm still a disciplined person. If I'm not supposed to do something, I don't do it, especially eating, because I have ailments that require eliminating some foods.
Overall,
And she was good to the children. In fact, I had more brothers. I wish I had today. Anytime there was a young boy that was having trouble with his father, she would take him in. So she brought in quite a few boys. But from her, I learned that people need help. I learned that from her. She was so willing to help everyone, and she would give you the shirt off her back, which, was said in those days.
well, you certainly followed in your mother's footsteps.
Yeah, but I started growing up when I was 13, because when I was 13, my mother was going to be deported, although she was born in New Bedford, Mass. They were going to do something to her because she was voting illegally. It sounds terrible, but it's not. It's not as bad as it sounds. But that's what was going to happen. But when you're 13 and something happens to your mother, you know, you have imagination. And I imagine her sitting in a boat going out in the ocean.
And what happened?
We had a Secretary of the State of Connecticut living on North Street where we live. And he was going to make her a citizen. After 5 years, he was going to say he knew her for 50 years. And he did. But that's not what really happened. I didn't know until one day when I wrote to I think the Library of Congress, asking for information about my father, because my father came over from Greece. And I wanted to know more about what was in our national records that might apply to him. And what this Secretary of State found out, that my mother married my father, who was born in Sparta, Greece, in 1907. It's hard to remember every little thing. It really is, because I'm going back a lot of years.
Over 60.
Yeah. I'm 87 now.
Wow.
So the government told me they didn't make my mother a citizen. They repatriated her. They gave her her citizenship back. Because I filed for my father to become a citizen too. During World War II, the people that originally settled in New Britain from Europe were busy finding jobs, bringing up their families, helping to build their churches. And they did so many of those things that they didn't get around to being citizens. But I found during the war, they wanted to be citizens. There was finally time to do that. And it just so happens that what happened to my mother, she asked the Secretary of State what she could do to help him, because she got her citizenship back. And he said, I wish that your daughter would go up. I lived 1 block from the Ilya Bird School where I started kindergarten. And he wanted me to go and check off the voting lists when they had primaries and elections. And I said to him, but I'm only 13. He said, but you know how to read and write. So I did it, and then I got interested in helping people, and helping the party. It happened to be the Democratic Party. It just happened to be the 8th Ward at that time was the only ward in the whole city that was Democratic. All the other wards were Republican. I doubt very many people today remember that, but I remember because I was so much a part of what happened.
Wow. Christine, do you recall any particularly humorous events during all these years of your letter writing?
I'm afraid not. Just the happy times meeting people. And of course what happened to me last Sunday. Because it's been quite some years since 1964.
Wow. Do you remember or still see on a regular basis, other than Donald Pelletier, any of the soldiers that you wrote to?
Well, you know, that's a strange incident too. A lot of things have happened to me in meeting people in some way unexpectedly, like what happened to me last Sunday. A lot of those things happened to me. But one day I was at a meeting at the VFW and I heard a name, Reynoldini. And I jumped out of my chair and I said, "Where is he?" And they were stunned. They didn't know why I did that. And I said, "I want to meet him." So they went out in the kitchen to get him. And they brought him in. And when I questioned him, I found out that what kind of work he did. He was doing roofing. And at the time, I needed a new roof. So, of course, I decided I was going to get him to do that. And then another time, I was placing a wreath for Purple Heart on a Memorial Day down in Central Park. And the young fellow from the park department was setting up things there, you know, for the ceremony. And I don't know, and I had a pocketbook, and I didn't want to carry a pocketbook placing the wreath. So I went over to the truck and asked him if I could leave my pocketbook in the trunk. I mean, in the van. Oh, what do you call them? I don't know. It's not a van. In their truck. Truck is good enough. And he said yes, and I asked him what his name was. And when he told me, I said, "Oh my goodness," I said, "I'm Mrs. Balint." I said, "Do you remember me?" And he said, "No." And yet he wrote to me for 1 year.
So he was one of the soldiers you had written to? Was this a Vietnam soldier?
Yeah, from Vietnam. And he had 1 whole year he kept writing to me.
Did he remember after you reminded him?
No,
Oh.
no. And I think there was a reason for that. I remember when I was doing some research on World War I, there was a professor from the university who was down at the New Britain Herald researching his family history. And he was kind of fascinated with what I was doing with the veterans. And he asked me, did they come home just like you're asking me? And I said, no, so many I have not met yet. I'd like to. But I know when they came home, all they wanted to do was forget the whole thing over there and just go to work, be at home with their families. That's their main thing, was to come home. In lots of ways I felt like we were pulling them through, because whatever they asked me to do, I did. But I thought the 2 incidents I told you about were the most important. But there were others. I wrote to the hospital ship Hope and got a letter from them, and I was pleased about that.
Now that Reynolds Dini, was that?
Reynoldini.
He was also one of the soldiers you had written to?
Yeah.
And did he remember the letters?
No.
So neither of those two had.
He didn't write back to me either. But I still see him. If I have a problem, I call him if I have a little problem around the house. And he comes running. He said, anytime.
Now, what was your career? Did you continue to be a legal secretary?
Yeah, for the first 7 years. But of course, when my husband, you know, another thing about Vietnam, I decided to work on the Vietnam bonus. I read in the newspaper one Sunday night, there was an ad in the paper that they were looking for people to work on the Vietnam bonus. So I decided I'm going to go for it because my husband was working at the VA. I said, gee, I can work in Hartford again because I had other jobs in Hartford. I had 6 working for the state. I became a part-time worker after Joe died. I only worked part-time because I still had the little boy. But I wanted to be busy and I needed to supplement my income.
So you worked for the state of Connecticut?
Yeah.
And what was the Vietnam bonus and how were you involved?
Well, when I went to apply for the job, they told me that all the jobs were taken. And I said, well, how could that be? It was in the newspaper last night and I'm here at 8:30 in the morning. And they said, well, all the jobs are filled. If you want to leave your name, if we have anything, we'll call you. And I said, no. I said, I want to work. I just answered a newspaper ad. And why aren't there any jobs? And he decided that, well, let me give you a point test. He was going to test me, asking me questions, and if I could meet so many numbers, And I was getting madder and madder. I said, how come there's nothing here? Now I'm going through this. But I was determined to stick it out. And I knew that I had something in my pocketbook that was going to shock him, because I knew that was the last question I was going to get.
What was it?
Well, when he got to the point system, I passed them all. The first one, are you the wife of a veteran? Yes. Are you a wife of a disabled veteran? And it just happened that everything was yes. Yes, yes, yes. And then the last question, he said, you probably don't know it, but he said, you have to have a work resume. We don't hire people without a resume. Out came the pocketbook with 3 pages, because I had quite a few jobs for the state and the city, plus law, as part-time. The lawyers were calling me when their girls left. I did just short terms. City Hall, they were always calling me to fill in when the girls were on vacation. In 1951, because I got connected with the Democrats because of what happened with my mother, and I went to school, to help the Democrats. They decided they didn't have people my age doing things in the party in those days. So the registrar decided to hire me. They wanted me to get paid. So they hired me to help when they were making voters. And at the time we were making a lot of voters.
So when you produced your resume, did he hire you?
No. Well, he said he would take them, and if he had an opening, he would call me. And I said, I don't think you're going to do that. I can get mad. I'm very easygoing, but I can get mad. But if I get mad, I'm quiet. And when I'm quiet, you're in trouble. That's a fact. Something about me people don't know. When I'm quiet, you've done something wrong.
So what happened?
I said to him, I just happened to be the auxiliary of the Military Order of the Purple Heart. I'm their president. And they sent me here. I decided to play some dirty trick on them too, because I thought it was not right for them to have an ad in the paper and they don't have any jobs. I don't care. It happened to me. It just happened. So he hired me, the lowest job in there. although I was the secretary, and those 3 pages had all the jobs, 1951, the Democrats were always giving me work because I was with them, from Elijah Burr School. I was Senate Secretary of the Education Committee. And from there, they gave me a job as aide to the Senate clerk, and my job was to keep track of the bills passed by the legislature. And at that time, really exciting things happened to me there, because Senator Governor Ribicoff was born in New Britain, and he was the governor at the time. And when I got that second job, he came in to me and he said, I have to give you orders. He said, when you're through, I was doing the journal, working on the journal to keep track of the bills. And I never did anything. It was like a librarian's job. But I picked it up. And he said, and when you're through with your work, you come into my office, and no matter if I'm at a meeting or wherever I am, you hand them to me personally. Now, the reason for that was because the senators and representatives would put the bills in their pocket, and that last night when things happened, crazy things happened to me. They would, I'll vote for your bill if you vote for mine. So that's why he did it. He wanted the bills. So I've met some very nice people in the work I did. After that, they gave me another job after that. Since I did those 2 jobs, they gave me a job working at the Hartford Superior Court, and I became a special deputy sheriff for Hartford County. I did civil work, doing the work of the sheriff serving papers, civil process, and also went to the jail to pick up prisoners to bring them before the judge, and if they were sentenced, had to go down to Niantic, where the jail is for women.
Well, you certainly have had an interesting career, along with your interesting experiences with veterans. How would you say that all of your experience dealing with our vets and our servicemen and women has affected your life?
I think it's the story of my life. If I connect the jobs, it goes back to, that's the real story. That's the best way I can put it. And the jobs were called colorful by other people.
Well, I think that says it all. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Christine, that we've not talked about during this interview?
About Vietnam?
Vietnam or World War II or the Iraq or Afghanistan conflicts?
I just have the feeling that I need to do it. I don't know why. You feel you're helping them, like my mother helped people,
And I have a feeling that you're going to continue doing this work.
I think so, because now all of the work, my own historical work, is at the university, and the vice president came to my home one day with Laura, and they asked me to be on their Veterans Committee. They're building a rotunda to honor our veterans, and they asked me to be on the committee. because they heard so much of what I have done over the years, and I was delighted to be able to say I do it.
Well, Christine, I'd like to thank you for all of the work that you have done for our veterans from all of our wars. You certainly contribute a lot to the history of the United States.